Hello, I'm Russell Butler, the CEO and founder of iVentiv, and we're here at KPMG in London. And I want to talk a little bit about iVentiv first, just to frame. So it's a business I started in 2008 during a financial crisis, and came up with a model which was focused on conversation. And one of my earliest events, I had Jay Cross come along, and he talks about conversations being the stem cells of learning. And that's something that's always resonated with me over the years. So what I've done with iVentiv is sort of taken on the conference space, but done that by trying to get people together for conversation. And what I wanted to do today was to have a panel here and just try and stimulate a bit of a conversation. We're midway through an executive development event at the moment, and so we're going to lean in a little bit on the conversations we've been having there and just ask a couple of questions so you get a little bit of insight in terms of what we've been talking about and some of our views on executive development. So with me today I have Serena from Software One. I also have Mika from NetApp, Frederick from Holt International Business School, Claire from Bupa, and then on the end we have Fiona from KPMG, our host today. So thank you for being with me. So the first thing I wanted to do, and we had a little chat about this a moment ago, is to sort of ask this first question really, when you think about where you've come from, your experience in executive development in terms of developing leaders or even your own journey yourself, I'm interested to see if there are any core elements, core pillars of executive development you think may have stayed the same over your career. Maybe to Frederick first.
Russell, yes, the world is so volatile and so changing all the time. But I remember in the last 40 years that and I'm giving away my age, but 40 years that I've been doing two things that was always there. Number one is executives always need to take care of the strategy. They need to look forward. They had visions and missions and values and strategic objectives, and they needed to know how to develop that. So that was the one part of the DNA of a business. The other DNA strand was people. How do I get people involved in strategy? How do I get them to understand? How do I get them to focus and so forth? So that was the pillars of, I want to call it, two DNA strands that has been, especially in the 21st century. I see there's some shifts in the 20th century, some shifts in the 21st century, which we can explore. But at the main, what is the same? People and task. How do you combine the two? That's the bottom line.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what's really important about what you said there is the word how. So I think what they have to do has stayed the same, but how they have to do it is changing. Mm-hmm. So we recently did a big study for a client, and it's really clear that regardless of what sector you work in, where you specialise, you really have two pillars that remain the same in terms of how you lead those people. So one of them is to be really adaptive and have agile leadership, where you understand the trends externally, connect with your people and help them lead through transformation and change. And then the other is that digital transformation. So what impact is Gen AI going to have on your organisation, and how can you make decisions in that context and drive people through digital transformation? So I think the how of how people lead is what's changing.
Digital transformation is an interesting one. Up till recently, when I started my MBA program in 2018, the big debate was, will the computer take over my job? That was the big debate. And the BBC had programs on that and all of that stuff. Then it shifted, the Deloitte came up with their report to say, no, it's about augmentation. So the computer is now no longer an extension of my human muscle like robots, but also an extension of my human mind. That is the thinking capabilities. Now in the last year or so, I see there's a shift. It's no longer only about augmentation, but digital computers, especially with the large language models, are thinking entities. They think relatively independent of human beings. So I think there's a shift now from augmentation to collaboration. How do I collaborate with these thinking machines? And obviously they are actually outthinking us, I think. So they are smarter, Homo sapiens is no longer the thinking one, but so we have to rediscover what it means to be human.
Yeah, and I think, AI is teaching each AI. So it's not just AI is being programmed and taught by the humans as like AI models are teaching each other and taking it into another realm beyond what we can think. But I start to think where I'm seeing the biggest shift is from leader as expert, and I think that's AI is potentially taking over a huge part of that expertise, but turning more towards awareness. And so it's actually whether that's being critically aware of how to sort of challenge and explore options and focus, or whether it's about society and all the multi-dimensions and the competing pressures that you have to think about as a leader. But this, for me at the moment, particularly in the last year or so, that leader as sense maker, awareness, focus, creator is probably the biggest shift, because it's actually, right, how do you make sense, whether it's data, intuition, and how do you deeply listen to the organisation and others outside the organisation. So almost listening has been a bit of a, that's not, you don't need that. But actually I think it's deep listening coming up now.
Drawing back to your question, what stayed the same is defining the role of the human. And the factors that surrounded it in the 20th century is very different from what it surrounds now. But what's continuously stayed the same is understanding what the role is of that leader in this VUCA environment, in this change, in this technology, in this geopolitical situation, but the role of what that person is in the firm, alongside its strategy, alongside its mission, and alongside the people they lead, has stayed the same through centuries, not just between the last and this one.
But the context changes.
The context changes.
And that's a word that I think of in this conversation, that it's contextual awareness. Our leaders need more contextual awareness than they've ever had before. And contextual awareness means of the market, of the external factors, of the world politics, of their shifting companies, shifting priorities, of their teams, of their individuals on the team's reality. So it's this cascading universe of context that they have to be aware of. It's not easy.
If this conversation flows the same way the morning did, the word context is going to come up pretty often.
And I think the important point that you make here is, I think in the 20th century, leaders think they can shape the context. That is in our human hands to shape the future. Hence, visions and missions and values and all of that. I think in the 21st century, the context has become so volatile that leaders need different skills, shaping it. Perhaps it is allowing it to happen, and that is where the new skills. I think perhaps intuitive intelligence is something, that new leaders can learn how to develop and cultivate. That is the non-rational part of our intelligence.
I think you're right. It's making sense of that and then helping lead their teams through it. So how can you then translate that for the organisation and lead your people through everything that's happening externally? So understanding it first and helping others lead through.
And that comes to, something that I wrestle with is purpose. Yeah. And is that something, because nowadays you hear a lot of, right, you've got to really be purposeful and focus on your purpose, but 20 years plus when I came into the workforce and into sort of leadership development, purpose was where we started at that time. So coming back to that, what's the same as well as what's different, it might be coming out differently in terms of how do you lead others through and what do you think, and perhaps nuance differently, but purpose is still at the heart of what makes me a leader, what makes others lead, follow, etc., collaborate. So I find that not a new thing, but something that's just endured throughout, which then creates belonging.
I like that. I found in the 20th century, I've developed with organizations these visions. So we call vision-led organizations, vision-led executives. Now it is more purpose-driven. Vision closes, create focus. Purpose opens up the space of unlimited possibilities. Is that what you mean?
Yes, exactly. You put it beautifully, Frederick.
Which probably is a nice segue to sort of lean in a bit onto my second question here as well, Frederick, and I think you're a very good example of this. So with iVentiv, when I look at how I built the business, I first of all was not enamored with the conference model that was having one person standing on the stage just talking at the group. So what I wanted to do was have it as a conversation, but also there are wonderful partners who work in the learning and executive development space, and it seemed to me that it was quite fragmented in terms of when they would actually have a dialogue and exchange with each other. There'd maybe be an RFP sent through and it was all sort of behind closed doors, here's our thoughts on what you should be doing, when the essence really should still have been around conversation. So when I look at what we've done with iVentiv, and of course you're representing a business school here as well, Frederick, hence the segue there, having people come together for these conversations has been absolutely critical. And so I suppose the next part of the question there is, how important do you see it to be to engage in honest and open conversations with those partners and suppliers that you work with outside of your organisation?
So if I was I think we've used this word context quite often. I think the first thing we all need to realize is none of what we do is an exact science, because there are humans involved. We are a socially constructed way of developing our organizations. So the first thing is, how much has a provider spent the time to understand my context? And that's the dialogue I'm most interested in having. I think over time, the off-the-shelf plug-and-play model will go, because at no other point in time in history has knowledge been so freely available and accessible. The one thing we don't need anymore is more content, because if you ask anyone in your organization, when they don't know what to do, what do? They're going to say Google, and then they're going to say they asked the person next to them. Your LMS probably doesn't crack the top 5 if you're lucky. So then flip that over to a partner, because I think the idea of vendors and providers will go, it'll be partners. And it becomes, how much time have you invested as much time understanding my context and my problem and being that trusted advisor, to quote Meister, as I have in my research to bring you to the table. And it's when you don't have that disconnect, then you have this, I will come to you to buy a product, and I will take your product, and then you will not know me and I will not know you again. So environments like this, where we spend time understanding each other, speaking to people like me who've spent all our lives in the coalface, so I can share with you what it is that bothers me right now, and then you can tell me what you can do for me. I think that sort of thing, Russell, is where these these events are really useful for us as leaders.
Yeah. Go.
Thank you. And to just carry on from that, and to look at it from the other side of the equation, our partners have the wealth of information and experience of going to so many other partners.
Yes.
They know the market. They can bring back all their findings and their research. So we learn from them. They're at a different front line that we also have to learn from, rather than just relying on them understanding our concerns. We learn about our colleagues, our peers, our competitors' concerns, and then learn about ourselves through that. Yeah.
I mean, I love those through partners' perspective or current, just those examples and those insights that you can generate in conversation. So whether it's use cases or whatever, but I'm struggling with this, and what you get from a prospective partner, current partner, is just that, oh, well, you know what, somebody else was struggling with the same thing. If it sounds like that, they tended to look at it with these 3 elements, or whatever it is, as an example. And that, for me, is just fantastic conversation, because it opens up different perspectives, and it opens up different thinking, and then you start to go, oh, actually, what I thought might be the solution is probably not the solution point, because we're insight driven.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, KPMG's whole model is about understanding what our clients are struggling with, but also what's really best practice, what have they done really well, and then what's happening in the market, and how can you use all of that to accelerate everybody's thinking and to move the whole industry along. So these events are really critical to do things like that.
Now, Russell, you know, what I like about iVentiv, and I've been here for a few conferences, you know, that you have shifted, you know, the scenario. In the past, and that's also happening in our industry as educators. In the past, the professor was there with the knowledge gathered from research. My job was to transfer the knowledge to students. They hear what I say and they write me assignments, and this is the little loop that we had. And many conferences, exactly the same. You invite speakers who are good edutainers and, you know, and motivators and all these 24 volts egos to come and share some ideas. And the conference sit there and applaud and so forth. But what I find iVentiv have done, you've shifted the paradigm. You have learned to ask good questions. So it is not the content, but it is the rich question. And then that question stimulates, you are leverage the diversity of cognitive diversity, the diversity of insight and experience. You create a new learning experience. So it's not the professor that teaches, but it is the whole learning ecosystem that you have developed. I don't know if I can use that word. Yeah. And that is what I really appreciate about iVentiv.
Which is, I was going to say, if I could capture that on camera, that would be very. I've caught you on camera saying that, which is fantastic. So thank you, Frederick, for pulling it together for us. Maybe if I move us to question 3 now, and this one for me came from, we had an event in Munich many years ago, and we had the former president from Michelin come along, and he talked about executive journeys and talked about how executives get where they are. And the first thing was to get the group to turn to corners and go off and have a conversation and map out what that looked like. And they mapped out quite a linear progression of what it would look like to become an executive in a big multinational company. Then he said, right, well, you're all senior leaders yourselves. Now map out your own journeys. How close do they correlate? And there was very little correlation between the sort of mapped out plan and actually the routes that we do take. And so my thoughts around that is, if you're thinking about the future leaders who are entering the workforce now, what do you think their critical experience and moments that they should really be looking to build and experience to pass them along on their journey? So not the sort of the roadmap that we might map out by standard, but maybe those other experiences and critical moments that will help them on that journey.
We have now, it was a 2022 Microsoft study, 150,000 startups a day across the world. 33% of those are in technology, and technology, you know, like not fintech, which is now sort of embedding itself, but, you know, environmental technology and areas of biotech we haven't looked at before, but AI, machine learning, 33%. You'd look at other studies, and it's the first time that there are 5 generations in the workplace together, because people are working till later, or people are entering the workforce earlier and put it all together. There's 5 generations. That means, who is the leader? Is it the founder who's a 20-something-year-old and started up the organization and within 5 or 6 years has finished all their series of funding, has gone IPO? Or is it the one who followed the more linear path, working for other organizations, possibly a little later in life? The definition of when somebody is a leader has changed incredibly. And therefore the skills that people need to get to be a leader have to come in at different times and at different emphasis than we need to before. And I think if we start with that, and it's not just about age, it's not just about innovation, I think it is about agility. Because never before have we had to think about leadership in a more agile and changing context before. Don't know if...
To link up with that, you know, again, the shifts that we have in leadership. In the past, you know, leaders were taking up a position. So there's a position and the leader fills that space. I feel that in the new world of work, there's a shift. There is a leadership space, and many people move into that space from time to time. It is not the big egos that fill the space, but what I call eco-leadership. Invite people to step into that space from time to time, because the leadership space is important. That is where decisions are taken. That is where direction and guidance is being given. And that space is very precious. But to dominate it with one ego, is very, very, I think, risky. So to open up that space, and I think to link up with you, I don't know whether that resonates.
Yes, it is, and you can even then extrapolate from that the skills, because if you sit back and think about it, there are very, very few skills that need to be introduced when someone is already a senior leader. Most of them you probably need to start getting quite early on in your career and in your work life. You hone in on them. And what changes then are your circumstance, your context, the vision you need to exhibit, the decision making and the pivoting. But all of that, how do you critically think, problem solve, how do you lead a team? There's very, very few skills. In fact, the more we start debating them, you'll realize that it gets even smaller that need to be introduced when people are leaders. So if you then take your example and bring it into that context, oh my goodness, anyone can be going in that stage. It's just a matter of developing those competencies within you to fit in there.
A large part of leadership is about experience, because you have had many successes and many failures and learned from them all along the way. So to your point, how can we give people those experiences as early on as possible? So my advice to young people coming into the workplace is always volunteer as much as you can. So take on secondments. What project can you do? What experiences can you get? But I think as organisations, it's up to us to give them the opportunity to have those experiences, whether it's through generating, situational learning for them, whether it's giving them projects, whether it's talent marketplaces. But how can we proactively help give them the experiences they need, so that when they get to a senior leadership position, they have already had a lot of those skills that you talk about. They've already built those as they move along their journey.
Yeah, I think that participation and that collaboration, when I'm thinking of this, I think for anybody coming in, jump into those amazing experiences, and particularly those uncomfortable ones where nobody knows the answer. I'd say personally, some of my biggest learning on route to being a leader was in those uncomfortable, I'll just go and join that, or we'll try and work that challenge through. And added to that sort of collaboration, I think that the humility, the low ego, that's a sort of an avenue that I would sort of encourage people coming in and go, how do you build that? Either some people naturally start off in that place, and some take a while to perhaps find that place. I'd probably encourage try and reduce your ego.
That having all the answers thing has changed so much, right? Because that's what used to be. You expected your leader to know. If you don't know, who does? And we still, and I'm not saying that that's entirely wrong, but the collaboration and the co-creation, because you've got to co-create now. Everything is moving so quickly, so you turn to the leader from a vision standpoint, but then and from a guidance, but you want to feel that you're all empowered within that, and that starts at any time, and it comes back again to your volunteering for experiences. But that having all the answers really stood out for me. Going, we don't need leaders anymore who have all the answers, because it's impossible now to have all the answers. So what we look for is in somebody who can help channel all of you together to finding those answers and co-creating them.
I think that that term "lead from where you are" has never been more applicable to our lives than now. But we also need to then have cultures in our organizations that support agency, that support somebody who's early in career with a great idea, asking for what seems to be something unreasonable.
Yes.
Right? We have to support intelligent failure as well. That's a big part of of the development, I think.
I just want to say, make a note about this thing about skills development. That is really a topic. We need to make more skills and competencies and all of that. But we talked about it this morning, Russell, you remember, that a leader, as I think, will not develop beyond the mindset that he or she has of him or herself or the organization. So if I have a mindset that the leader is there to guide and to instruct and top-down management and so forth, that is where I will hone my skills in. But if I've got a mindset that the leader is there to unleash potential in the organization, to create a context where everybody can thrive, then my skills will follow my mindset. I don't know whether that makes sense.
Yes, the growth mindset.
So I think, that perhaps a lot of leadership development should focus on the mindset and then the skills that follows within the mindset.
There's two things which we're doing quite a bit on, or in the growth mindset angle, and everyone's been hearing of that, and the concept of continuous learning, and the concept of ongoing, that every day is learning cannot pull you away from the context of what you're doing. I think there was an experiment run where people taught, there were two groups for scuba diving, and you taught the concepts on the shore and you taught the concepts in the water, and guess which one works out better, right? So you take the same thing. Every time we drag people into a classroom for a concept to build on a skill, whether it's leadership or anything else, you're removing them from the context in which they operate. So this idea of continuous and lifelong learning is now a new term come in. Coupled with that growth mindset idea is where organizations and individuals within organizations need to be pivoting through, including the leaders.
I think to add to that, experiential learning as well, because as you say, scuba diving, theory on land, practice in the water. That's a great example of our focus on experiential learning and understanding how important it is. I think nobody wants to learn through academia, academic, theoretical only. That has its place to support and contextualize. I can't get away from that word.
I do believe this is where learning leaders have been lost for a long time. We focus so much on the learning experience, we forgot about the experiential learning. We focus so much on the edutainment, as you called it, on whether somebody liked something and the happy sheets and butts on seats. Can I say butts on seats? I did. Sorry. We focus so much on that, on how whether the experience was enjoyable and all of that we forgot about the experiential learning when that should have been our focus. I think a lot of L&D functions have been tripped up in that.
If you allow me a metaphor, I always ask the questions, can caterpillars fly? If you ask a caterpillar to fly, it will think, how can I put wings on this little fat body, to move faster from the one stem of leaves to the other. But for caterpillars to fly, it's not to put wings on the fat body. And I think that is where many skills development come, help these little. But for a caterpillar to fly needs to go through a transformational experience. Because you learn to fly through going through that experience, that metamorphosis, where your mind shifts and then you become a butterfly. And I think that is something that we can perhaps also orchestrate. How can we help leaders to go through that transformational space instead of getting them wings to fly?
I like that.
I like that.
Which I think is a really nice way to probably finish the conversation. So really wanted to thank you for taking a moment out of the flow of this event here to come out and have a conversation, give people a bit of a flavour of what we do at iVentiv. We, as people know, we run it under the Chatham House rules. Generally what happens in the room stays in the room, and it's all about people having conversations. So I really appreciate you spending some time to come here and have a conversation and share a little bit of the flavour of what we do with iVentiv. And I think conversation, as I said right at the start, feels to me like a core part of the essence of how we continue to move along. So really enjoyed you being here, appreciate your time. And hopefully anyone who's watching this might come and join iVentiv, have a look on iVentiv.com and see where we are. We're around the world, different locations, and always stimulating different conversations. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.